The Scottish Government has been urged to admit defeat over its efforts to implement the named persons scheme after an expert group suggested a code of practice would not be workable. The policy set out to appoint a single point of contact, such as a teacher or health visitor, to look out for the welfare of children up to the age of 18. It had been due to come into force in August 2016, but was delayed after a legal challenge. I'm joined now by Simon Calvert of the No to the Named Persons campaign. Good morning.
Good morning.
Where do you think this leaves the scheme now?
Well, I mean, it's in a mess. And it's worth just picking up your introduction that described the scheme as a single point of contact. And if that's all the named person scheme had been, there wouldn't have been all this controversy. But it's worth remembering that what the Scottish Government want and what more than 100 MSPs voted for was a scheme that allowed the widespread sharing of private information on children and their families. And the UK Supreme Court said that that was a breach of human rights. That's a very serious business.
Which is why this expert group was set up then to try and suggest or come up with a code of practice. But the rationale behind it, what the Scottish Government says it wants, is Scotland to be the best place in the world for children to grow up. And you can't argue with that, can you?
No, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And it sounds very good. But what they had proposed was something which fundamentally breached the human rights of families. And they've never apologised for that. And what they proposed was a scheme that was deeply unpopular and which left parents wondering what role, whether they were meant to play a kind of a subservient role in the lives of their children. And that's not as silly as it sounds, because we had from the Scottish Government leaflets and documents describing the named person in terms like the named person is the head gardener and parents are just the gardeners in the lives of their own children. So it's been very unpopular. But
well, you say it's deeply unpopular, yet it had the backing of all the major children's charities, didn't it? It had the Bernardo's, Aberlour, Action for Children and Children First.
And they were wrong. I mean, I don't know what to say to you. The UK Supreme Court ruled that the legislation backed by all those groups and by 100 MSPs was a breach of Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights. So
Not the intention, though, was it, Simon Calvert? Maybe the court did agree with you that it did breach data protection rules, but the intention, it didn't say the intention was wrong, did it? Which you're saying it is, because it undermines parents. But sadly, parents need to...
I don't want to misrepresent what the court said. No, I mean, my view about the scheme is not identical to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court certainly ruled that the heart of the scheme, which was the power to grab and share private information on families against their wishes, was a breach of the human rights of those families. We mustn't forget that. And I think that it's time for the Scottish Government to apologise to families for that. And what they tried to do, I mean, on the day that the Supreme Court ruling came out, John Swinney issued a statement that made it sound like he'd won the court action. But of course, they've lost it. And here we are, three and a bit years down the tracks, and he's not been able to resurrect the legislation precisely because of what the Supreme Court said about this data sharing provisions. I think it's just time that they apologised. And also that they said to parents that they're going to retrain these named persons so that this sharing of their private information against their wishes doesn't happen.
Simon Calvert, thank you very much indeed, of the No to the Named Persons campaign. We did ask the Scottish Government on the programme. They declined. We've got a statement. Ministers are currently considering the advice and recommendations of the expert panel. We remain committed to promoting good information, sharing practice in the best interests of Scotland's children and families.